Okay, so I will. Okay, now it's starting the recording. Okay, thank you, Verena, for the heads up. So DEL4ALL is a Horizon 2020 project, a coordination and support action that our main goal is to develop a unified strategy at the European level, basically connecting the power of digital transformation when applied to education tasks, including school, university, and further education, so without restricted focus to one specific order of learning. Next slide, please. So the three main objectives of the project are, on one hand, to gather a knowledge base about digital education and advanced technologies, and this workshop is, of course, one of the tools that we have in this to hear your opinion, to understand what is important and what is coming down the line. And then also we need to develop an ecosystem of collaboration and something that can go on as a community beyond the project. That's why we are being kindly hosted here by Ec-Tel, so that we can also interact with your community at large. Last but not least, look forward to define a strategic agenda that covers both research topics and also policy recommendation that then at the Commission level can be also used in the next steps. So, next slide, please. So there are several tools that we use for that. One of which is this workshop. We have expert consultation, surveys, interviews, and roundtable, and this is exactly what we are doing today, where we concentrate on, as I said, policy, research agenda, and best practice gathering and discussion. So I think that this concludes the next slide, but I think this concludes my presentation. And thank you very much. And I'm happy to immediately give the floor to our keynote speaker, Kinga Katona from the UNG2 of the European Commission. Kinga, floor is yours, and I think you can share the screen to show your slides directly.
Yes, thank you. In a second. So is it working?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you for having me in this workshop. My name is Kinga Katona. So I work at the European Commission in the Directorate General for Communication Networks, Content and Technology. And one of the areas my unit works on, among other things, is policies and funding programs to support research, development and deployment of technologies that can help teaching and learning. So all our activities and actions are linked with two major policies and their goals. One of them is the Digital Education Action Plan, and the other is the Digital Decade Strategy. I will present these very briefly in a bit. So when we were working early last year on the preparation of the Digital Education Action Plan, we actually had the pandemic and the school closures and the lockdowns that came. And this, let me switch slides. So this made education at all levels to switch to online distance learning from one day to the other. And this showed clear problems and challenges for education all over Europe. For example, in relation to connectivity, the availability of equipment for students to connect to online learning, lack of quality digital content, and also issues of digital competencies, not only of teachers, but also of parents and carers who quickly had to insert these teaching tasks, homeschooling tasks into their daily lives. So we ran a number of stakeholder consultations during 2020, both as a preparation to the Digital Education Action Plan and through our projects such as DEL4ALL are, to find out what sort of issues these brought to light. So these are the ones on these slides. So there are existing gaps, and there are effects of the pandemic that are increasing digital divides and also EU dependencies in technologies. There are inequalities, social and economic inequalities, which are also creating new divides. And of course, the relevance of digital competencies is increased. So, of course, when there's hard times, cooperation and engagement in a wide area is what can help quickly and efficiently. And also, it should have been, or hopefully it was, a turning point for the use of technologies in education. So we're getting to the Digital Education Action Plan. So this is, very briefly, it's a policy framework for digital education. It was published in September last year, just after the first lockdowns ended. It takes into account, because of the stakeholder engagement and consultations, it also takes into account issues that arose in the context of the COVID pandemic and the school closures. It is also a comprehensive and integrated strategy with a strong focus on quality and inclusion. So it has two priority areas. One is the development of high-performing digital education ecosystem, and the other is enhancing digital skills and competences. Under each of these objectives, there are 4 or 5 actions which are important for us specifically. For example, high-speed school connectivity, or promoting the understanding of emerging technologies to use in education, and how they help teachers, students, and school infrastructures, as well as support to research and innovation projects. So the action plan is complemented, as I said, with the Digital Decade strategy, which has targets for us more relevantly for skills. So by 2030, Europe should have more than 20 million ICT specialists. And this would include increasing the number of women in such areas, and also that more than 80% of the adult population has basic digital skills. The other thing is, which is also relevant for digital education, is of course infrastructures in the context of connectivity. So the targets are to have 5G everywhere, including rural and remote areas, and gigabit connections in all households in Europe by 2030. So lastly, the various work programs related to these areas we're working in will support connectivity, of course. I mentioned already the Digital Decade target, so by 2030, the connections in all households, 5G coverage also in rural and remote areas. There is a specific point for schools and education institutions. And this is very important because the pandemic showed that there are gaps in terms of access to connectivity for students and for teachers alike. So these will be supported by the Connecting Europe Facilities digital strand, which will complement the national investments that are planned or are planned at the national level through the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And these both programs should bring fiber connectivity to every educational institution in areas where no such networks are available at the moment. So the second here is extended reality learning. This is an action in Horizon Europe. This is already published. So this is under cluster 4, and it should develop innovative education solutions based on extended reality, combining human-machine interactions with real, mixed, augmented, and virtual environments. This is to allow higher engagement with teaching material and more efficient interaction with complex problems or new environments. So the goal is solutions for immersive learning enabled by virtual environments to help students to access instructional practices and acquire knowledge at their own pace. The third is, well, so the caveat here is that this digital education and learning in Digital Europe, the Digital Europe program is under adoption now, so it won't be adopted probably until mid-October. But we have a planned action here. It's a coordination and support action, as you see, for networking for European education technology, SME startups, linking them with a wide variety of educational stakeholders, research, academia, ministries, teachers. So this will be quite a broad coordination and action project. And it will support cooperation, exchange of best practices, help market uptake, mentoring and training, guidelines for content development and such, with also a view for pedagogical and societal and ethical aspects, and also a roadmap to help the European education technology ecosystem, and also to complement regional, national, and European efforts. So I'm pretty much at the end of this presentation. And I would like to thank you for participating in this workshop. Thank you again for the organizers, the DEL4ALL project, for having me. And I would like to encourage you to take part in the discussions, because what you share also will help us shape the research agenda. It will help us shape policies that we make, and it will also inform us on which direction to steer possible research support for. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Kinga. And are there questions or remarks from the chat? If not, we can move on with the panel session. But in general, I remind all the participants that you can write your comments or questions that you have for the panel. Thank you very much, Kinga. Sorry, I'm told that my audio was not working properly. And so I said that if there are no questions already from the chat stream, then we can move on with the panel session. If I can see the agenda slide again, so that I can introduce the panelists. This panel discussion will start the commentary on the research, the link between the research agenda and the policy recommendations. Here they're coming. So next slide again, and then yeah, there. Okay, so we have 5 panelists, and if possible, I would turn on your video, and I will then give the word to each one of you just to have an opening statement. So our panelists are Kinga Catona stays as panelist after her keynote speech, obviously. Then we have Tommaso Dalla Vecchia that represents another coordination project like DEL4ALL that is called the Impact Tech, and as the name suggests, it is focused on the commercial education offer, and so this gives another perspective on the digital education and policy recommendation agenda. And then we have 3 researchers and practitioners of technology application and pedagogy in modern settings. So we have first Professor John Dominguez from Open University. Then we have Dr. Alex Gretsch from Commonwealth Center for Connected Learning, 3CL for short. And then we have Professor Wolfgang Prinz from the Fraunhofer FIT. So I would like each panelist to very briefly present themselves and give maybe an opening statement about what is digital education for them, and what technologies or examples of use of technologies they find, let's say, instructive, enlightening in this post-COVID situation, for example. So thank you for to all the panelists, and maybe I can start again with Kinga so that we connect on the policy side to the keynote speech.
Yes, thank you. So, as you all know, education is not an EU competence, so member states are in charge of policies regarding their own education system. So what the Commission can do is to help coordinate and to support research and innovation in this area that can help and maybe nudge a bit national authorities and education. But there are so many aspects of how these things can be used, how technologies can be used. So for us at the Commission, and specifically in my unit in my area, where we work for the digital transformation of education, it's very important to hear from a wide variety of stakeholders. So everybody from teachers to innovators, startups, academia. And this is why projects such as DEL4ALL is so important for us, and the results coming from these discussions are important to us, because they will help us in the end to know which direction to go. And of course, DigiConnect is not the only one supporting education. There are other programs than Horizon Europe and Digital Europe. There is also Erasmus+, the Marie Curie, and a lot of actions. There is a significant part of the recovery and resilience funds which will go as planned to the national education, both in infrastructure and in skills. But as I said, we would like to hear from people outside the Brussels bubble, although I'm based in Luxembourg. So thank you for participating.
Thank you, Kinga. Then I would just now hand over to Tommaso Dalla Vecchia from the Impact Tech project. Please, Tommaso.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me among these distinguished speakers. I'm particularly happy to be here with you, as European SchoolNet represents more the K-12 education sector. We really focus on pre-primary, primary and secondary school education. We are a non-for-profit organization and a network of 33 ministries of education in Europe and beyond. And since the very beginning of our history, we've tried to support transformation in education, for allowing ministries of education, but also schools, teachers, experts to make the most of technology, but also all those innovative teaching practices and pedagogical frameworks that could have been used for improving education. Now, with the pandemic, of course, we understand that this process has undergone a very topical moment. It accelerated to a certain extent. It really also made obvious some concerns that were only within the one really working on the sector. So I'm happy to discuss about that further down the line. And as mentioned also, I'm also representing here Impact EdTech project, which we have the chance and luck to coordinate, in which we try to accelerate, incubate, and accelerate startups that act in the edtech sector and try to make this digital technology more effective for really improving and supporting education. Now, in terms of what technology and what digital education is for us, I just want to say that it's not a new thing for us. In a way, it's something that we've been working for decades, and we understand it as the possibility, the opportunity of teaching with and about digital technology. We'll probably have possibly a little time to get more in details on what this means, but we hope it's really an opportunity for the education systems to improve and make the best of what technology has to offer. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tommaso. And now next is Professor John Dominguez from Open University. Please, John.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to this meeting. So I'm the director of a research and innovation lab at the Open University, and I've said to many people, I think I have the best job in the world. So the OU is just over 50 years old, and we've always used technology of the time. So back in '69, we were nearly called the University of the Air because we used radio. Then we used TV, video, personal computers, and the web. I came to the OU in the '80s and to do a PhD on building an AI tutor for students. And I think maybe I'm still working on this somehow. So in fact, we're doing, as well as my lab, we're spending £4 million every year on test and learn projects. And one of the things we're pushing now is to give, in the next, let's say 3 to 5 years, every OU student their own personal AI assistant, and every one of our 4,000 tutors their own assistant as well. Speaking more generally, one thing I would say about the whole sector is that with respect to technology, it's a laggard sector where you don't see anything new in education and then other sectors take. It's the other way around. So you'll see, for example, in music, we have Spotify, we have Facebook in news, etc. There are serious capacity and capability issues, and those can hinder the take-up. In terms of specific technologies that are going to be important, I think there are 3 technologies that will be important. 24/7 learning through everyone having their own personal AI assistant. Also, we're also working on projects to use AI to support the generation of online materials, because anyone who's spent any time generating online materials know that it's a lot harder than generating resources for teaching face-to-face. So in fact, I have a UK funded project looking at that. As has been mentioned before, augmented reality and virtual reality will be important. We have a unit looking at that at the OU. And then the final technology that I think is important that the other speakers may also mention are decentralized technologies, such as blockchains, where we'll be able to support something we call self-sovereign education. So an educational landscape where students are in control of their learning data and moving forward. So I think that's all I'd like to say, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later.
Thank you very much, John. And next is Dr. Alex Gretsch from the 3CL. I hand over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Giovanni, and thanks for the invite. I'm a strategist, I'm an academic, and I'm somebody who's passionate about lifelong learning. I head up the 3CL Foundation, which is based in Malta, but all of our work is essentially outside our shores, operating internationally. I teach new media at the University of Malta, at the Faculty for Media and Knowledge Sciences. I sit on the board of the Center for Distributed and Ledger Technologies at the University of Malta. I'm a consultant of the Commission on a few related projects, I guess, like the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure project. That kind of tells you where my interests dovetail. And for many years, I've been on one of the DGEAC Delta group, where essentially you have educators from all around Europe trying to put technology to good use. My interest really increasingly, I think as I've got older, has really focused now on personal learning pathways and how we can put disruptive technologies like AI, like the blockchain, like VR to good use. And we live in interesting times. We've just now, and we are still going through it. Do not believe anything that people tell you that we are out of the COVID emergency situation when it comes to the various academic faculties that some of us may inhabit. Okay. I think we're at a very interesting stage now that COVID is showing us, and this is on the basis of a lot of the research that we've done through DEL4ALL, that the education model at the moment is fissuring, that it has great problems that it didn't realize it had, or it had for many years and it tried to ignore. And I think that's what DEL4ALL, I think, can be put to good use. That essentially this is a project where we started, in January 2020, just as this whole pandemic was about to start. We had one meeting in Luxembourg, and this thing happened. And what we're learning is that you have, maybe once we start talking about lifelong learning rather than education, I think we can start to have more meaningful discussions. Once we start focusing less on the institutions and more on the business of learning. And that's where John has already mentioned this, the whole concept of self-sovereignty, the empowerment of the learner at par with the rights of the institutions. Once we start focusing on this area, I think we can have more meaningful research in the future. And we could also potentially elevate some of the success stories that haven't been sung maybe loudly enough. I worked on the First Nation State blockchain credentials project in my tiny country, which was then taken up as a model of best practice and then multiplied by Gartner. There are many interesting experiments that are happening worldwide, and there are many eyes on these things from the World Bank onwards, from Google onwards. So we're at a very interesting stage, I think, right now in this world of emerging technologies and education. So that's where I am.
Thank you very much, Alex. And then last but not least, I hand over to Professor Wolfgang Prinz from Fraunhofer. Please, Wolfgang.
Yeah, thanks, Giovanni. Also, thanks for the introduction into the project and also into this very nice panel. I'm the vice chair of our Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Information Technology. And in this context, we are doing research in the area of blockchain, augmented reality, and also learning technologies, in particular also cooperation technologies. We are doing this now for more than 25 years. So we developed one of the first internet-based cooperation technology systems that has been used also in education for a long, long time. And on the other hand, I'm also a teacher by myself because I'm a professor at the RWTH Aachen University. So I experienced myself in this particular situation. And also building upon the statements that my colleagues made before, I think what we can observe is somehow that what we can observe is a fact that is very similar to the observation that we have in the whole home office and hybrid work stuff. I think we see that people are now able to work individually We see that there is a lot of content available that people can consume, that they can learn with. But on the other hand, what everybody lacks is the social interaction, is the social contact, is the presence with other people. And I think here we need better technologies, future technologies that just go beyond what we are currently seeing here with all the video communication stuff. Because sometimes an example that I often draw is that already in the 60s, you could see Doug Engelbert with the mother of all demos. We demonstrated 95 how you can do video communication between the separated capital in Bonn and Berlin. And actually what we see now is the same technology, just with a better user interface. But there is nothing new on a functional level on top of that. And I think there is more research needed in this content, in this context. And but we have to be aware also, because Kinga, she made a very nice statement. She said we need to work on the infrastructure, gigabit, but we also need to work on technologies like augmented reality. But augmented reality also requires appropriate hardware. And on the same sense, we need better hardware to connect people. And then we put up another layer that these people now need better hardware, even in addition to experience and to participate in this extended reality stuff. And maybe later on, I can tell you about an experience that I made 2 weeks ago with augmented reality, but I would like to talk about this later on. So that's on the one side. And while I was talking about the social aspects, up to now, we really had personal contact. We had personal identities. I know my students, I could see them, I could feel them, I even probably could smell them. And on the other hand, what we now have is just digital identities. And for that, we see what John and also Alex said, we have this self-sovereign identities. We need to identify people now on an electronic basis. We also need to see how can we see this lifelong record, how can we build trust? Yeah, and here other technologies like blockchain and so forth come into the game. Yeah, so I really see we need on the user interface level, on the interaction and social skills level, we need technologies. We have to be aware that it's not that much hardware intensive, yeah, because we have already the problem with the gigabit internet. And then I also see that we need new things to build trust, identity, and credentialing in this system.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. With this, we closed the initial, let's say, opening statement from the panelists, and now there are several topics that kind of popped up from your introductions already. And one that I was thinking of is, I mean, first of all, full disclosure on the, let's say, project side. DEL4ALL started with a focus on specific advanced technologies, AI, augmented reality, and so on, that we heard of about. But then, of course, we had to adapt, and we ended up engaging with a much wider and not at the same level of let's say, maturity and advancement for these technologies. So I would like to ask the panelists a little bit, would you pick one technology, whether advanced or mainstream or in any level of maturity, and how would you think it could change or improve the digital education struggle? So could you pick, let's say, if not game changer, technology that you think together with specific pedagogical use could make a difference in some context? And any takers, or I will then go for a round. Okay, John, maybe.
So maybe I'm cheating because I'm partially repeating what I said earlier. In terms of the top game changers, I'd pick two, really. I think what has, over the last 10 years, what has AI done? The biggest companies, the most profitable companies in the world are now based on AI. I could go through the list of Google, Amazon, Facebook. They're all AI companies. And in education, the practically is, approximately zero. We're doing things in the OU with machine learning, but they're practically zero. And if you think of all the context that students have and the lack of resources for teaching, the possibility of giving someone on their first day of school their own personal AI that follows them and gives them advice on all that's going on and understands the materials they're reading. So again, you know, there are many aspects I could go into detail, but for example, one, you know, the printing press was invented, someone will correct me from, I think in the 15th century. We had the digital age, but basically most of the digital resources we give to students, you could almost do with the printing press and the post box. We're giving them flat PDFs documents, which I think is a scandal. We need to move at a minimum to a situation where the materials and resources that students see are machine understandable, machine readable, and not a PDF, which is basically the same as the 15th century printing press. So giving every student their own 24/7 available AI that understands their personal circumstances, understands the materials, can answer questions of materials, understands all the, can help with the organization, etc. That's a big game changer. The other, as my colleagues have mentioned, moving from an approach where instead of thinking of students spending 7 years in one institution or 5 years in another institution to learn, where they can pick and choose. You know, imagine if they could go to the best wooden architecture school for a term, and then they could go to the best metallic building school for another term, and they could go to the best computer chip design, and carry that disjointed learning, and also learn in the workplace, learn with the colleagues, and that could all recorded. So everything is really around the student rather than around these separate, distinct, siloed institutions. So those are two examples. I mean, I've only scratched the surface, but there's a lot that we could do here.
Thank you. Wolfgang, yep, go on.
Yeah, I would say beyond the technologies like augmented reality, extended reality, blockchain, and so on, I think we also have to look at the properties of these technologies. And here I would say some terms are situatedness, appropriateness, immediateness, and also the entertainment of that. I think we can have the best technologies and everything. It must be somehow entertaining, and it must be immediate. It must be able to use on a fingertip, just right now, when you need the education, because we all see that on the one hand, people at universities, they go to courses, and then in this course, they learn that and that. But when we think about lifelong learning, people want to learn in the immediate situation right away. And then they need the best explanation possible. And then it should be, this information must be available with the devices that they have at hand, like the mobile devices and things like that. And this brings me to the example that I just had recently when I was invited to give a talk at a conference, and they told me, well, it's a conference in a 3D environment. And I said, yeah, that's fine. Until I was told 3 weeks before that I had to submit my slides 3 weeks before. And I said, hold on, I mean, 3 weeks before the conference, I'm not preparing that much in advance. Yeah, so normally it's the evening before. And then I said, no, but it's in an Oculus Rift, so we have to prepare the whole environment. So I sent in my slides 1 week before. I got an Oculus Rift by a postal service. I had a 2-hour learning session on Oculus Rift, so I knew how to use them, but they invested 2 hours in educating on how to use the VR glasses. And then we had the event, and it was basically just a PowerPoint presentation in a 3D environment. Yeah, and now I had to send the glasses back. And there you see, it's a nice technology. It was entertaining, but it was not appropriate for the learning in this environment. I think that is something that we have to focus on. So on top of the technologies, looking at the situatedness, the immediacy, and the entertaining of that, and their augmented reality and all the stuff really can play a very important role to explain things in a much better way than just in a PDF.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Yes, Alex?
Yeah, I'm dovetailing with what John and Wolfgang said. I think the first thing is when I had a question was, yes, it's not just about the tools. And this is one of the first lessons that we got out of DEL4ALL. We whether we liked it or not, we try to ignore the pedagogical problems. But essentially, you have to deal with these things. Even if you just look at AI, I mean, what do we mean? Do we mean, you know, teaching AI as a subject, teaching about AI in the academy? The way AI is starting to be used by the academy for sometimes control or surveillance, albeit, or on the other hand, to provide a more personalized service, say for students who need special attention. Again, related to AI, all of the issues related to Western concerns about platforms, or platforms do with data. And I ran a workshop for ASEF a couple of months ago. There are very different views in China in terms of how you can use AI, and very different Western views. So I think what we need to also consider is this moment again, which is what Wolfgang was very appropriately talking about. You can have the tools, but the real world environment is still stuck sometimes in this Victorian model. I will give you one example, which is quite laughable actually. I work for a university, and the university is like all universities around the planet is trying to pivot to going back face to face. Because that's what people are harking back to, community, being able to look into students' eyes and the whole learning and community experience. And immediately you get problems like, what's safe? What's a safe place? And when even you determine that it's not safe to be teaching 70, 80 people, for instance, and you have to pivot online, you have universities telling you, fine, but if you're going to teach online, can you come and teach online on campus from your room so people can see that we are using the campus facilities to actually be teaching something? This is the kind of ridiculousness, okay, of what is happening out there, okay? That you have basically people running universities based on business models which are stuck in the 20th century. And it is, not an accident that John was talking about printing presses and how we're trying to get into this brave new world. This is the moment, and that's why I keep on going back to, if we start to put the student right at the center of the opportunity of the problem, that everything becomes learner-centric, student-centric, I think we can have more informed, discussions and recommendations for the Commission as to where it should put its money to good use. Clearly, I'm interested in decentralization. So clearly, decentralized technologies are something of great interest to me. But again, we are a long way from also the holy grail of having, these, it's almost like using, a DAO with using the blockchain terminologies, where you can use smart contracts to have a university that migrates the business of administration to the machine and goes back to teaching face to face. And that's where the real value is. We're a long way from there. And yet, the technology promises us these affordances of the technology. And that's why we're in such an interesting time right now.
Thank you, Alex. Maybe from these comments from you three, there is something that really relates to these affordances or situatedness, or the fact that technology can only be evaluated in a complex scenario together with all the boundary conditions around. So maybe, if you don't mind, Tommaso, I wanted to ask you something about this, because I think you wear two very different hats right here. On the one hand, you deal with K-12 school education, and on the other hand, you represent a project that deals with the business side, with the commercial and product development side of EdTech. So do you see, for example, a technology that is a game changer in both, but in very different ways? Or do you think there is a very big separation between these two worlds in terms of technology and digital education, let's say, goals?
Thank you for the question. I think, well, first of all, just on the concept of a game changer. So from our experience, at least from my experiences, at least in K-12 education, I haven't seen a technology becoming a game changer in the sector from a pedagogical educational perspective. So even though, of course, we are advocating for innovation in education, so technology can be supportive, can be informing certain reforms and changes. So that's definitely something that we are keen to see and to support. I will go a bit more into that aspects, and I'll also say a couple of examples that for me are promising. In terms of my other hats in this project, the Impact EdTech, which is also financed by DG Connect, there's this interesting combination of these two aspects, as you rightly mentioned. There is an acceleration process that comes after an incubation process. So in the incubation process, yes, we try to make sure that these companies are actually they can be sustainable, profitable eventually, and be in the market and be successful. Why? Because they need to provide solutions to education, so they cannot just come and go. They are part of the environment really when they become companies in this field. They really have a big responsibility. On the other side, there is the acceleration process, which is focusing especially on piloting these solutions in real settings with the limitations and the reality of the context in which they are supposed to be implemented. But there's also another component that goes beyond that testing, which is again the big fundamental question that is asked to a startup in this area, and at the same time to the teacher that is trying to use that tool in their classes, which is how do I integrate this tool in a pedagogically sound way? So what can I do with this tool that I cannot do otherwise? Because indeed, all the examples that have been made until now are very true and very and indeed I like that it was mentioned that it would be a scandal to have a electronic PDF as something considered disruptive in the technological side. So that was the very starting point. And on the other side, game changer in education there are. So I want to be optimistic for K-12 education, especially because we have been witnessing a lot of experimentation and a lot of wonderful practices in teaching and learning with technology in schools in Europe. But really what it made that successful was to focus on other type of game changers that, for instance, were more general access as personalized learning. And what we've seen is having an impact in the way teachers teach and students learn is, for instance, digital formative assessment that wasn't possible necessarily in a traditional school delivered without a digital technological solution, and that now can allow a teacher to really personalize the learning path of their students to a bigger, better extent, and to follow them differently, and also to understand better what really works in the way they are trying to provide content and educate their students. So this is really one of the technology that we are trying to explore, experiment, and promote further. Will this lead or be a part of those AI-powered systems for personalized learning? Possibly, yes, but again, this is the technology that is here now, that is reliable. And on the other side, AI, for instance, to make an example, again, we are opening a very big discussion, raise concerns on ethical aspects, especially when it comes on personalizing the learning path of young children. So we're trying basically to make the most with the technology that is reliable right now. But looking at what's, of course, is emerging, trying not to be too reactive to what will come next.
Thank you, Tommaso. And maybe, Kinga, I would like to close with you this round more about, again, this context-dependent, different situations. How is this handled at the policy level? And maybe also how this affect the fair transition, the digital divide, and all these inequality points that you also mentioned.
I'll try to be quick. Also, I have a flight passing. Sorry about that. So I think that the points, for example, that John, Alex, and Tommaso raised are very relevant, but we try not to look at education as universities only. So we know we've been funding research and innovation in this area for more than a decade, actually probably decades. And from what we see, there are really good solutions. Some of the technologies like online labs, piloting new solutions for example, children with reading difficulties or learning difficulties. And technologies which motivate children, maybe because of their novelty in the use in education, but the uptake depends very much, and this is a completely different aspect, on the teachers' availability and willingness. They need, as Wolfgang mentioned in his example, they need training. And in one of the recent projects I closed, the research showed that they were more willing and more successful if there was direct help or tutoring available, so they didn't have to go through manuals, videos, just contact someone. So we cannot make these technologies and these solutions part of the curricula. We can help, fund them. We can fund them to develop them, but the take-up is mainly up to policymakers in member states and teachers who are willing to go the extra mile in the use of them.
Thank you very much, Kinga. And we are now approaching the end of this first part. And I would like to maybe allow, let's say, one sentence, a quick comment again around the panel on maybe one single word that we heard in this topic and also in the Digital Education Action Plan, which is resilience. So we heard it about COVID, we heard it about changing education, we heard it about supporting different aspects. So how do you think, in a short sentence, we could help make education more resilient in the future? And so maybe Kinga, you go first because you might be already time constrained.
Okay, so I'll go with reducing the digital divide to have access for everybody to what they need.
Okay, thank you. Then Tommaso.
Connecting to what Kinga mentioned before about teacher training, which is an area where we are absolutely dedicated. I think my wish would be to make teachers more confident through, of course, teacher training, but also providing them an environment where they are respected, where they are invested on, and where they are allowed to try and fail as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Wolfgang?
I think resilience means that you have to be flexible in order to react on new situations. And I think this should be one part of the overall training. Experimenting, flexibility, and don't keep it always the way it was always good, but try other ways.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I agree with Kinga's point. Maybe what I would choose is assessment, or I nearly chose everything. We need to change everything to make it resilient. So the idea, to expand on it, the idea that we put someone in 2021 into a dark room and give them a sheet of paper and a pencil to assess them is sheer madness. And that's not very resilient. So thinking about assessment in the 21st century would be a good idea.
Thanks a lot. And then Alex.
Yeah, I'll repeat what I said. Less about education, more about lifelong learning. Resilience implies that we have to remain obsessed with providing value to the end user. And that, for me, is not necessarily the institution that delivers it, but citizens at whatever stage in their life they may be. If we stop learning throughout our life is not really worth living.
Very good. That's an excellent close. Thanks a lot to you all panelists. And we can now have a short 5-minute break before we start with the next session. Unless there are questions from the audience or something that I missed, let me know in case. If not, please, Marita put the slides for the second block agenda, and then we can reconvene here in, let's say, three minutes. Okay. Yeah, there you go. And then we will have the lightning talk in 3 minutes, okay, at 4:06 or more, sorry, 14:06, 2:06 from Dr. Elul from the Center for Distributed Ledger Technologies. Thank you, and be back in 2-3 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. After this short break, I think we could soon start with the lightning talk about emerging technology in education from Dr. Joshua Elul, from the Director of Center of Distributed Ledger Technologies. And maybe first I can spend a couple of words on the content of the session. This session is about best practices, and after the initial talk, we will have a presentation about identifying best practices in the post-COVID era from Dr. Alan Third, Open University, and then we will have, so this could be more a methodological setup, but then we have 2 examples of best practices for digital learning from Alexander Streicher from the Fraunhofer IOSB Institute and from Celia Sokolowski from the Adult Education Center of North Rhine-Westphalia. And then we will have a final Q&A session so that we can engage again with the speakers, and maybe even from the public, it would be nice to hear some of your best practices that you would like us to be aware of for our future research and policy recommendation work. So welcome. There you go.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks, Giovanni.
I can leave you. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have the screen now. It's not in presentation mode yet, but it's coming, I think. Yes. Very good. So please, Joshua, start.
That's great. So I'm going to be talking about more the education of emerging technologies, and particularly from the perspective of blockchain that we have been focusing on for a few years now. So really just to set the scene, digital money as we knew it up till now was really revolving around banks in the middle, providing for us the ability to transact with one another, even if that's using, let's say, internet banking or mobile banking, there's always the bank at the middle. And 2008, 2009, Bitcoin proposed this person-to-person way of transacting digitally by sending funds without having a bank in the middle. So really what it proposed, what cryptocurrencies propose, are a way to have person-to-person transactions where no one can intervene. And the mechanism that enables this is the blockchain, this peer-to-peer way of transacting where there's no central authority that can intervene. Now, this type of technology brings about certain challenges. So we see technology bugs and hacks going on in this space where millions of euros and dollars are being lost due to software bugs. So it's really important that our educational system is making sure that the specialists in this area are equipped for these new types of challenges. But it's not just about technology. Our laws can even have bugs, or rather mistakes. A simple comma in a contract resulted in millions of dollars being lost by a particular company. So we're talking about technologies that are being used in legal contracts for business relationships, and we're talking about code, but we're also talking about law. So it's important that our education system is not only focused on one aspect, but it's giving this full view of multidisciplinary education that is required to work in this space. And the same goes for our financial operations. When we're setting up companies, we need to make sure that it's based on sound principles. And we've seen companies in the past go bankrupt due to not having the right foundations in regards to their financial operation. So we really need to get to the right people. And this is not just about technology. This is getting technologists, financial, legal experts. However, one big issue that we saw in this space is that these different individuals, these different professionals have different ways of communicating. They have different perspectives and different baggage. And often when they're working together, they find it hard to cross that divide because they're so used to working within their silo. Do we really need this type of varied expertise? Well, somehow we need to be able to tackle this problem from these different perspectives, but how are we going to go about doing this? If we look at a particular case of, let's say, smart contracts are a way of automating obligations in code, and the world where that is merging with legal contracts, on one hand, we have to deal with law, on the other hand, we have to deal with code. And we have different professionals handling this. We have our lawyers creating our legal contracts and our programmers creating our smart contracts, but yet these two are somehow meant to fit together in unison. And what are we going to end up having at the end of the day, this legal smart contract? Who are we going to go to? How are we going to educate these individuals to be providing both the code expertise and the code know-how as well as the legal know-how? Will we have individuals who are specialists working on their areas, or would they have to become knowledgeable in all areas? Will we have teams working together? Or will we just have some way of creating this hybrid? We don't know the answer yet, but what we believe is that we need to have some way to have a team of individuals, at least in the short term, who can provide their input, their specialized input, yet able to bridge the divide between the different professions. This is why actually for blockchain, we came up with this idea of a multidisciplinary masters, where we take in legal professionals, business and finance and tech professionals, and we provide them an introduction to all the different disciplines. They become literate in all the disciplines, yet they specialize in one discipline. So this is the sort of the short-term direction that we've taken to create professionals that are literate in all areas, but specialize in one area to help build this multidisciplinary team. And this is not just about blockchain. This is about all areas tech. When we're talking about artificial intelligence. AI is being used in all financial operations. We're now seeing the EU put into place the AI Act, and it's going to have a heavy amount of regulatory oversight. So really, we need to start thinking when it comes to emerging technologies, not to only think about the requirements and the expertise required to create this technology and be proficient in the technology, but how the other disciplines are going to be versed and equipped to work in their individual lives whilst working in this area. So multidisciplinary is really a key aspect in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this it was, I think, a very enlightening talk, because it shows really this template of technical and domain expertise that is also exactly the conundrum that we face in the digital technology. I think we can go on with, let's say, a more in-depth methodological focus on the best practices in digital education, with the next presentation that is from Dr. Alan Third from Open University, if I'm not mistaken, right? Alan, you can share your screen. Very good. I can see it now.
So it's from me. Is my background the right way around, by the way? Just
you zoom background.
Yes.
Yeah, it came.
Okay. It looks the wrong way around to me, you see. So
no, that's the job, I think.
That's all right. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for essentially setting up the prerequisites for what I've been planning to say. So I'm going to pick up on quite a few themes that have already been mentioned, and really just talk about the topic, I suppose, of best practice in education going forward. What do we think it means? How do we decide what it is? Quite significantly, how do we communicate that? There we go. So everyone is probably quite fed up of hearing the phrase return to normality, and I agree with Alex that we're a long way off that, and even if it's just round the corner, is that what we want to go back to? Where is this not an opportunity to make things better? And you're probably also fed up of people saying that about lots of different areas of our life. But this has been a major change, a shock to the system, I suppose. And it's also, yes, there's a chance to actually look at how things are going. I can't actually see my speaker notes in this. Can you still see my screen if I do this? No.
Yes, at the moment I see the rethinking education slide. So if you're not on that slide, maybe there is some sync.
No, it's okay. I get it. They're just off on another note. So the rest of, but yes. So this is a chance to look at not just what we do, but what is it we actually want from what we do in education, as in other things, and what's the best way to get there. So a couple of lessons that we've learned, and certainly within DEL4ALL, we've been quite strongly exposed to, and several of these, in fact, I think all of these to some extent, have already been mentioned. So there's the topic of resilience and what that means. Also the importance of digital pedagogy and the distinction between how one goes about teaching in the digital space or a blended space versus a face-to-face space, and what we can do to support it. And also the question of what counts as an advanced technology. We talk about using advanced and emerging technologies for education, but perhaps we as digital education researchers don't have the same idea for what is advanced in technology terms compared to people on the ground, as it were. And this has become quite clear. So in terms of resilience, so I mean, I think we can all agree that the pandemic response illustrated some fragilities in how things are done. It was very difficult for people to adapt in very trying circumstances. I'm not putting any blame on any people. I think there are systemic issues that we need to address to maintain a more stable education system. And I don't, as well as the fact that I don't think we're near necessary or as near a way out of the current crisis as might be, but also there are other things to be concerned about going forward. I don't want to be too like depressing or anything, but we also do need to be preparing for climate crises and further things or further strains of things like COVID. And education's too important to leave to what we can, what we've seen in the last year and a half. More importantly, though, a lot of the things that seem to be needed are actually things that we've spoken about as communities for a long time as being super important. So I think it was Wolfgang mentioned flexibility in terms of being resilient, adaptability to different circumstances. We're now, I think, quite widely in a relatively fluid, blended form of education where people are, it seems a lot of people are going back to face-to-face, but there are also some areas where that's, for example, you could, a child may be asked to stay home to self-isolate if they or their parents are exposed, or some places are closing or reopening as circumstances demand. There's a lot of change going on, and we need to be able to be adaptable in terms of our systems and how we approach things to manage that best. And in doing so, we can also use this to address other long-standing issues. So actually, things like inclusivity and accessibility fundamentally rely on the personalization of learning and being adaptable to individual circumstances and not being able to assume that everyone, and this is just in the formal setting, that everyone in a formal education setting is in the same place, doing the same things, learning the same way. And this might be an opportunity to make some of the infrastructural changes and cultural changes to help us build more inclusive education in general. I may have spent too long on this, but pedagogy has been driven dramatically home, I think, to all of us, that there are a lot of technological things to support online interaction and communication, and those can be used for education, but it's a question of how best to use them. And I mean, we've certainly had a number of contacts from people, teachers, for example, who just have not known how to adapt to online teaching from a face-to-face. People are having serious issues because they're not seeing their students' faces, they're not getting any feedback, personal feedback for how individual students are doing. Problems with assessment and choosing the best teaching modalities. And this is not an issue with the technologies as such, it's an issue in how to use them. And what I think is missing here, there's clearly a need for significant training. There is a need for infrastructure and support. We've had a number of comments from people talking about how difficult it has been to get at an institutional or national level understanding outside of education, for example, in terms of national policymakers, that this has to be a bigger adaptation than just do your lecture over Zoom. And the resources to support that. And also, and just in practical terms, what has been missing for an awful lot of teachers are things to work from. So how examples of appropriate digital pedagogy and how to use them. and that can be adapted to their own needs. And finally, and I don't want to make too big a point of this, but it is important. So the initial proposal for the DEL4ALL project were to focus on advanced and emerging technologies, blockchain, AI, augmented and virtual reality, and so on, things we've spoken about. But what's become quite clear is that things like just video calls have been seen as advanced technology and have been quite fragile for a lot of people acting in education, or tools for collaboration or co-creation. The topic, John mentioned the topic of assessment. There's been great concern over how do you do formal closed book exams in these sorts of settings. And again, this has highlighted the need for changes to infrastructure, to training, to the scalability of digital education. I think those of us who've been working in digital education directly have developed quite good evidence and good ideas for how to do it, but they're not necessarily disseminated to the face-to-face traditional environments, and because they haven't needed to be, but now it's been driven home that perhaps that's not good enough. Perhaps we do need to be. So I'd just like us to look a little bit, I promise I will try and wrap up soon, about what is best practice. And just to pick some sort of highlights, I think a best practice in education has to, of course, be effective, which I would say perhaps is a question for research in practice. It has to be achievable, something that can actually be done. And I think this has been the issue in the crisis response, of course, is that what is achievable is grossly limited by the time and resources available. And now we need to spend the time to think a bit more about what we can achieve. And also contextual. Okay, so the best ways to use technology for certain kinds of education, that does not come in a one-size-fits-all form. It has to be adapted, it has to be pedagogically motivated and suitable for the context in which it's being applied, for the who is it who's learning, for whether that's in an institution or whether it's a lifelong learning context, whether there is an educator other than the student themselves, what different pedagogical approach is a particular learning pathway best suited for, that sort of thing. And we need to be able to relate the uses of technology for education to this idea of a learning context, and we'll be able to collect and compare what context different approaches are useful, and we need to collect success stories and use cases for how best to use and adapt different technologies to different educational goals and contexts. And this is one of the tasks we're working on in the DEL4ALL project, and within the project, and more importantly beyond it, because this is not a short-term thing. I think there needs to be a space for not just to develop and research best practice, but actually to develop pipelines to get things into practice and being used with learners in the ground and in the right context, and not just, well, we have a shiny new technology, can we use it here? So I'm going to wrap up now. We're going to have a couple of short presentations, and I think Giovanni will introduce those. But thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Alan. And yes, the closing of your talk points to the more practical and situated contextual aspect that can only be approached also through examples and real experience of concrete cases. So now we're going through the first of this, that is from Alexander Streicher from Fraunhofer IOSB, sorry. And if you're ready, Alexander, I don't know if you have slides to share, or we have a few. Hello.
Hello. So let's try that. Where is it? Okay. Can you see something?
Yeah, I see your slides in presentation mode, so I think you're all set.
And you can read it? Is it readable?
I can, but it depends on the screen. But yes, I think it's very
Okay.
readable for me. Yes, I think it's.
I'll try to make it bigger. Maybe now. Okay, let's start. Right. Oh. Okay. I think I have to first switch off the timing. Okay. So yeah, hello. I'm Alexander Streicher. I'm a computer scientist and research fellow at the Fraunhofer IOSB in Karlsruhe, Germany. And yes, thank you for inviting me to this session, and thanks for the opportunity to present in a nutshell some of our work on learning environments of the future, enabling sustainable distributed e-learning environments. And first, some quick words on Fraunhofer. I'm sure you already know that. Fraunhofer is for applied research, and we bring this applied research to the private and public enterprises. And we are 29,000 employees, something around that, working in 75 institutes and research units, and for all kinds of different research areas. And my field of research are intelligent assistance systems, in particular adaptivity. So this is a personalized adaptive training and learning. And in this talk, the motivation is that we have this very fragmented market of e-learning installations, very huge heterogeneous installation. When you look at our own installations and that of our partners and customers, we often see a very heterogeneous landscape. Here's a list of some well-known learning management systems and their market share by the number of installations. And as you can see in this diagram, or the so-called squid diagram, or the LMS distribution, the market is very fragmented. And it is big, and it has lots of players. And it has many, many different products which should play together. You may all know that. You may all use some of those. And now, do they really play that easily together, right? How to bring them into one boat? And we are working on that. And this is an application scenario, how you can achieve that. One solution approach could be to unite the different teaching or learning technologies in a common infrastructure and to interlink them by a central middleware solution. We all can benefit from established e-learning standards and protocols to build a middleware solution which operates as a managing broker and which interconnects all your systems using the interoperability protocols in the communication layer. Two prominent protocols or examples for that are the learning tools interoperability. This is LTI. You can see that at the top there, and the experience API for tracking activities. The software architecture could run locally or in the cloud, so you can choose where your data is actually hosted. And a web portal which sits on top provides single sign-on functionality, of course, using authentication standards such as Open Authentication, OpenID, you know. And we at Fraunhofer, we have developed such an architecture together with our partners. They are listed here at the right. And it has been deployed and is operational. So the idea is to have this middleware approach with which brokers all the systems using the e-learning standards. And we believe that such kind of an open architecture using standards is the key to sustainable learning environments, which can be easily adapted to evolving needs. Here you see some application examples. You can have a single sign-on on a web portal, which then embeds the various tools. This can be seen here on the right. And all the challenges on data flow handling, activity tracking, GDPR, etc., is done in the background by the middleware. So when you want to use that, then yeah, standards and the middleware approach allow to integrate a variety of services. And at Fraunhofer, we have implemented the various AI services using this approach. For example, a portal and recommender system, which adapts to the user. We already heard that in the other talk, right, with adaptivity. Then you have something like learning analytics, which tell about the user's learning progress to make your system better and finally, ultimately to make your users learn better. We have integrated adaptive gamification, which offers dynamic difficulty adjustment for or computes the need for assistance. And the trick here is also that this is realized as an AI service for easy adaptivity integration to new installations. So you can easily adapt that to your own installations. We have an AI-assisted semantic search engine, which can crawl all your learning management systems using that LTI standard. This is something Google so far cannot do at the moment. Also, it offers course curation functions, so you can quickly edit your course structures. So when you have a new semester going on and you want to edit your course, then you can use this assistance system. And we have integrated a chatbot, which can assist the users and answer their questions. Some examples here. And yeah, thanks for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me. That's it. I think your microphone isn't turned on, Giovanni.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I clicked on it, but didn't trigger. Thanks. Anyway, thank you, Alexander. And we will also have a short Q&A session after these two examples. So if people want to ask questions, they can please use the chat already. And now I hand over to Silvia Sokolowski for the next presentation. I think about the COVID-19 response of your institution, but talking is yours, Silvia. Yeah, now I see your screen, but only part of it. So it's kind of a square. Yeah, now we can see it, yeah. But I don't hear your voice, Silvia.
Celia, I think you're muted. Maybe the host can unmute her.
Not Celia, this is Tommaso's presentation right now. And I think his microphone isn't working or so. He is not muted. Wait. His presentation.
I think I'm unmuted now. Is that the case? Okay,
yes,
thank you.
Yes,
yeah,
this
is my presentation. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me. I'm the director of the Association of Volkshochschulen in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is the biggest of the German states with 18 million inhabitants and the lion's share of industrial production in Germany, and in fact 131 Volkshochschulen. And I want to give you, cannot avoid it, to give you a very short introduction into what is the Volkshochschule in Germany. These are the biggest provider of adult education in the public interest in Germany, with close to 900 institutions and 3,000 branches in all over Germany. But we're talking about a very heterogeneous landscape of Volkshochschulen that is reflecting the structure of our federal republic. We have a great variety of state laws regulating education and setting the frame and the legal status and the funding for Volkshochschulen and other educational institutions. And at the same time, we have a great variety when it comes to size and professionality of the work of Volkshochschulen. If you, for example, just consider that we have flagships in, say, Munich, Hamburg, Cologne, etc., with a professional staff of 150 pedagogues and up to 9,000 freelancing teachers, compared to, for example, an institution on the island of Heligoland in the North Sea with only 1,300 inhabitants that is led by volunteers. These are all Volkshochschule and they all provide education and enrich cultural life, but under very different conditions. Volkshochschulen are autonomous institutions, but they are organized in association as ours in North Rhine-Westphalia. Their program is really diverse and with different emphases with regard to local needs and challenges. I don't want to get into the slides too much, but I just give it and you might consider it afterwards. I think it's also important to see that the program of the Volkshochschulen always reflects the key task of Volkshochschulen as institutions that serve the public interest. This is the core of Volkshochschule is to serve the public interest with adult education. There is an annual statistic concerning the performance of Volkshochschulen in Germany provided by the DEI, the German Institute of Adult Education in Bonn. And this is some data of the last normal year, 2019. Numbers for 2020 are not yet published and available, but it gives you also some data about the importance of Volkshochschule as an institution in Germany. This is just for a short introduction because we want to talk about the not normal, exceptional time of the pandemic that boosted digital enhanced learning at Volkshochschule in an enormous manner. And I nevertheless have to start with some background important for the understanding of why Volkshochschule were able to resort massively to digital solutions during the lockdowns in 2020-21. This is also because we started to develop platform-based digital solutions for Volkshochschule at the beginning of the millennium with the first learning portal launched in 2002. Which, by the way, was a platform for literacy training, which at that time was regarded as a very strange experiment because illiterate people were believed to refrain from computer-based activities. Meanwhile, we have hundreds of thousands of learners on the latest version of that platform, a very successful platform for German as a second language and basic skills training like literacy, numeracy, etc. But then we expanded the work, and in 2018 we launched a platform that is called VHS.Cloud, Volkshochschul Cloud, as a network for Volkshochschulen and the digital space for courses, webinars, and MOOCs. I have to say that we started the whole platform project, whether the learning portal or the VHS cloud, with a clear understanding that Volkshochschule needed to be part of a digital transformation of society in every respect, in own developments and also development for courses. But this was a major effort for our associations and the member institution, as we received no funding whatsoever for this project. And it's still a major big effort. I know that it's somewhat useless or maybe boring to complain about financial shortcomings, but I want to stress that it demands a significant share of our resources to develop and uphold a platform solution adapted to changing needs and keeping it à jour. Important to note is that this platform is a tool for organizational development. It's not only a content and learning management system with a file storage and integrated communication and conferencing tools, but it is instrumental to the overall professionalization of the staff of Volkshochschule, a tool for much closer collaboration of our member institutions, for expert groups and committees, and a vehicle for a much better orchestrated common strategic development of the program and policy of Volkshochschule. Before COVID, many Volkshochschulen and especially the small institutions were very skeptical and reluctant to introduce webinars and digitally enhanced learning in their program. The VHS Cloud was promoted heavily by the associations of Volkshochschule, but traffic on the platform was easily manageable. Well, no surprise that this changed immediately with the pandemic and the first lockdown in 2020. All of our activities were then on the cloud and in the learning portal, and alternatively, there was no activity. Volkshochschulen were extremely happy to already have a digital solution that is the common platform, and very happy also that there were already experiences on that platforms to what solution by early adopters meant and some examples of good practice. The next months then were very mad because tens and thousands of teachers and staff members needed support and training to transform their educational offers into online courses and webinars. Teachers, staff, and also our participants proved to be very open to distance learning in the last year and a half, and they tried out a lot and generally supported digitally enhanced learning and teaching. Adult education is a field of low regulation in Germany compared to schools and universities, which was also helpful with regard to what we were able to perform on the platform with regard to any online experiments before and during the pandemic. Some federal programs before COVID were mandatory face-to-face courses, like, for example, the integration classes for German as a second language for migrants. But under the circumstances of the pandemic, Volkshochschulen were then allowed and able to set up online classes. It was an interesting experience to see that we lost some participants in the lockdown and could tell in many cases that the reason was that online courses were not accessible for them due to a lack of adequate devices or slow internet, or due to lacking computer skills or user skills. But that on the other hand, we were able to win new groups of participants to our educational offers. People who were unable or found it hard to attend face-to-face courses because they live in small villages far from the next Volkshochschule, or who are at home with young children, or for whatever reason they cannot reconcile a fixed face-to-face class appointment in an institution with other duties and interests. So this poses the question of what is inclusive learning settings in the digital age, and it still has to be explored. Yes, coming to an end, and the question of current challenges. This is at least one. I think while the pandemic is not over yet, we already know that the wide range of online offers will not go away with vaccination and a return to face-to-face settings. We see in Volkshochschulen that we have no choice but to serve both online and face-to-face, which means to develop smart hybrid formats to sometimes maybe double our offers and courses. And we see that more than ever resources are needed for our programs. I'm specifically talking about hybrid solutions because the USP of Volkshochschule is the local anchoring and the meeting the needs of the community on the spot in the city or the place where the Volkshochschule is located. And in the online world, our institutions are now, they found themselves in a competition they never had experienced before, and this still causes a lot of irritation. And the expectation that the associations of Volkshochschule will regulate that new emerging online market of Volkshochschulen. So this is also an interesting challenge that is posed by the pandemic and the turn to online webinars on a massive scale. And last but not least, we do have a big question concerning the viability of our current solution. I mean, it needs a huge amount of resources. I already mentioned that, to uphold a standalone platform for Volkshochschulen that serves the heterogeneous needs of small and big institutions, of advanced and slower institutions. So I welcome any discussion on this, and I hope this insight is somewhat helpful for our discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Celia. And now we have still, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes for a Q&A session before then moving to the completely interactive third part of the workshop. Are there any requests from the audience, some questions that you would like to ask that was in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay, then maybe I can kickstart the process at this moment. And one thing that I noticed listening to both examples and also the initial 2 talks from Joshua and Alan is the fact that technology as also we saw that also in the first part, must always be evaluated in context, and you cannot predicate success or failure by a technology definition alone, but you have to also consider how this is employed and what are the institutions that participate and what are the pedagogical context and the objectives that are connected with that. And so on that, I would like to ask to our participants and also to the public, if someone wants to intervene on this, what do you think are the main barriers and challenges to achieve this? Because it is clear that we have to take care of the context, but and it's also clear that the pandemic experience highlighted that a minority of institutions are fully prepared. Even the one that believe they are fully prepared, then they have to face unforeseen circumstances to really, let's say, where the rubber meets the road. But I'm asking, can we define some specific barriers or enablers that could be really targeted either through research or through policy innovation, or just through best practice, let's say, spreading and communication, so that more people know that a certain approach has been already tried successfully by other institutions in a similar situation, because this is what we would like to do with our best practices catalog, to show what works and, more importantly, when and in which context it does work, so that it can be replicated by the other institutions. So maybe first, my first call would be to the speakers of this session. If you have some comment to make about challenges that you encountered or barriers that you think are still in place and could be resolved by either research and innovation actions or policy improvements. We also heard something about the financial, let's say, the combination of research goals and funding availability.
I could start.
Yes, please. Thank you, Alexander.
Because what you just asked rang a bell for me. It's not just the main thing about context. Context is important, okay, but I want to bring it a little bit further. For us, the challenge is often regarding the content. So the content in the sense of context, right? And the content, of course, is driven by the use case. So there you have your context. So what we typically experience is that we all have these cool research prototypes. Maybe in my field of research, it's adaptive personalized learning for serious games and so on. And then after some time, you want to apply it to a new context. Yes, and then new content must be introduced. New application scenarios are there. So every time we have this barrier and this new challenge of bringing new content into the systems. And with the system, I mean these heterogeneous system landscapes. You just heard from the Volkshochschulen, right? And they have a very heterogeneous system landscape, and we address that as well. So in the e-learning context, you see these endeavors with learning tools interoperability standard. So not just SCORM, where the content is just transported, but the systems are interlinked and the content stays in the various systems, right? And what I want to bring to this discussion is that you often see the problem is to bring your systems to new application fields. And then often the curation or editing, authoring of content, of new content, or adapting content to new systems is a very high challenge.
Thank you, Alexander. Some reply maybe from Celia or from Alan or Joshua.
Yeah, I
barriers.
would. Yeah, I would like to add that, in my opinion, I mean, from the standpoint of Volkshochschulen, the curation of content is not the main problem. The main problem for staff and pedagogues and teachers alike is to have an easy accessible technology and a platform solution that is somewhat reliable in terms of that they do not constantly have to adapt to new system and new functions, etc., but can concentrate on the didactics and not on technique. So I think from the standpoint of pedagogy, it's also important to develop new understanding of hybrid and e-learning sessions, and to develop the e-learning competences of the pedagogical staff. That is foreseeable a big task. But on the other hand, we need technical solutions that are accessible and easy to use for the teachers. And maybe I found it quite exciting what you presented, Alexander, to have like one platform solution that can be like an overall solution for everybody, for all our participants, because this is the other side of the story, that participants need to get into e-learning the easiest way as possible. We need to roll out this for the public, for everyone, make it accessible for everyone. And I think inclusive, digitally enhanced learning opportunities need to be very, very accessible, very easy to use. And this is still, in many cases, not given. And I think this is a great barrier still at the moment.
Yes. Just to add there, what you talked about is this technological barrier, right? And just to add something here, the idea is that you can stick to your own e-learning system where you are familiar with, right? When you use such a kind of a middleware approach with this architecture, right? You can stay with your own system, and that your own system gets interlinked and brought under one roof. And this could address this technological barrier problem. Oh, there is a chat message. There are other. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, maybe I can add exactly the problem of content creation and content adaptation in different contexts. I believe that what is a little bit represented in the current discussion is a contribution that those who are producing learning materials for different contexts can provide, and probably are even interested to provide in the same way as they do it in the analog learning world. So school books are yearly revised, curricula change. There is an entire industry behind producing learning content. And as long as there are obstacles in terms of reusage of digitally produced material, I simply say multimedia rights management, multimedia content or usage rights for different types of usage, different contexts. From the perspective of the publishing industry, I believe in the creative context, especially, and also in the education from the publisher's point of view. Here, a lot of obstacles still exist on the legal point of view, which, if we take the example of the education sector, if a teacher wants to use the content of the local museum in his own created learning course, he has to really difficulties simply to make usage of a simple digital image, or probably something that is available next door to him. I think for publishers, this problem is the same on a completely different magnitude. So reusage of digital multimedia material by the according experts from the learning industry from the publishing industry, educational industry, I think can be a step forward to take the pressure from teachers who have not only to solve the technological part, not only to see how to integrate different skills in the class and their own skills, but they also have to prepare appropriate digital learning material. And I think here there is still a gap in comparison to the analog world, where large part of the learning material is provided by external providers. After, of course, it has been checked by the teachers beforehand.
Yep. Can I just agree and expand it to the development of OER, open educational resources? I think we need both. We need to have like school book producers and the publishing industry also. I think they're already interested in the online market, but yeah. But on the other hand, we need a sustainable development of OER and sustainable platform solutions for educational purposes in the interest of the public.
Yeah, thank you, Georgios, and thank you, Silvia, thank you, Alexander, for the interesting comments on this best practices topic. That once again, I would say, like we saw in the first part, also taking the best practice angle other than research or policy, we still end up in the, let's say, acknowledgement of the fact that digital education is, let's say, complex meeting point or a technological feasibility and options with pedagogical and I would even say societal structures, institutions, and different roles that have goals and capabilities that are, of course, very, very diverse, very variable. And so it is hard to assess technological impact without getting triples of technology, what can do, people, what roles want to use it, and what is the context is a word that is overused, but just for lack of a better term, all the various other policy or social conditions that affect this combination, the effectiveness of this combination of technology in a specific situation from a pedagogical point of view. We also have seen in the two examples that technology can be an enabler, so can be like invisible, let's say, mediator that makes things go smooth, and you keep on using your old learning platform that suddenly becomes better, even if it hasn't changed itself, but there is something behind the scenes that works. That's, of course, technology can be used like that, and can bring a lot of value like that. There are also cases where technology needs to be, where the users need to be made aware of technology. And so the fact that the Volkshochschule, even though you were already very ahead of the curve, you had your digital infrastructure 10 years before, no more, 15 years before the pandemic. Then when everything was deployed, then the user or some users didn't have the capabilities or the devices to be able to access that. So there are these two, I think, aspects. And in my opinion, the complexity of the scenario is why the bottom-up best practices approach is more promising, because it's very difficult to come up with some kind of theoretical framework that guesses in advance what are the 5 factors that make the difference, or what are the 10 categories of software technology that make sense. It's best to gather the information so that everyone has a story to tell, and then all together we can try to extract understanding from these individual stories, and also to exchange, to trade them, so that we can learn from each other. So this was the purpose, I think, of the workshop so far. And now, before going to the third part, it is really a fully interactive, let's say, co-creation and discussion moment. I would like to give you a technological introduction to the tool that we are using. So we prepared a shared mural, so a collaborative workspace where we gathered, like as if in a big in a big poster on a wall, we gathered themes and questions that we in the DEL4ALL project, consulting with our partner and expert, think might be a way, a map, a kind of a map to gather the important knowledge that you have, and we can share. So give me a second while I share my application. So I think that this is the one. So can you see now my browser with this?
Yes, but it's very small. You need to zoom a bit.
Okay. So maybe I can do it like this. Is this better?
Maybe we can share the link already.
Yeah, because now I'm just showing you around, but to participate, you have to go with your browser and to this very mural dashboard, and now should be shared. The link should be shared in the chat. So we divided the space in three themes. So on the one hand, we have the best practices themselves. Then we have the stakeholders, so exactly the people and institutional roles that can be engaged in these best practices. And then at the last, we have the goals and also the barriers and the gaps that maybe someone encounters. So the idea here is that we will split into three different breakout rooms, I think, and you will have a moderator per room. And in groups, you will first discuss and put answers to the questions. For example, one group will start with the theme A. And so you see there are three questions. On the right-hand side, you have the let's say, agenda, the outline, and you can click. So if you want to answer the question A2, you can click and the screen goes and zooms there. How do you answer? You just put a sticky note. You can double click and you create a sticky note and you can write something there. That's a possibility. Or you can also use it directly from this toolbar on the left. You can click and you have different shapes and colors if you want. You can just pick one and place it there and you can write. We will have 3 rounds because we have 3 groups in 3 breakout rooms with to complete the three topics, right? And every 15 minutes we are going to switch. So I will set a timer after you broke out in the 3 rooms. I will set a timer of 15 minutes, and you will have a local moderator, one per each room, that will you can refer to if you have issues, questions. And then, of course, each room can also self-organize. Maybe in a room you want to start with discussing with each other and then do the sticky notes or not. This is absolutely up to you. And again, the themes and the questions are best first shot, but they are guiding. So you can write basically whatever you think is useful in the sticky notes, and we will take care of that. We will take it into account in our next works. So if Amrita, everything is ready technically, then I think you can split in the rooms, and I will, let's say, manage the mural on my own, and then come to different rooms if necessary, if the local coordinators need that. Then we will reconvene for wrap up. Thanks a lot, and see you soon after the exercise. Bye for now.
Hi, I'm Rita. Could you please assign me to the room with Wolfgang?
Hi, I'm Rita.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Giovanni.
Yeah, are you,
am I
been
supposed to be in the
bounced?
room with Verena?
I'm not sure in which room is Ashwin supposed to be now, Amrita.
Is in third room.
You should be in room 3, so can you put it on the... No, but you are.
No, he is in room 3.
Yeah, with Wolfgang, so I don't know.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's where I...
Yes,
Okay.
he is with Wolfgang.
No, sorry. I was just telling.
Yeah.
I just thought I was supposed to be with Verena. That was all. So that's
Okay,
fine.
no,
I'll
I
try.
think, okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks.
17. Welcome back, everyone. Just checking that everyone is back from the breakout rooms, and then we can proceed, I think, with the wrap up of this last interactive session. Thanks everyone once again for participation. And the idea now is, I mean, I was looking at the mural, so it was very interesting to see all the activity, but now it would be nice to have a short summary from each of the breakout room. So I think we start with the first room. Who started with the team A? Was Verena, right? Okay. So Verena.
Yeah, that's us. So first of all, thanks a lot to my group members for joining and for putting some post-its there. Well, there were a lot of things that were put on the mural board, and I think it's a bit difficult to summarize all of that, but I think the main aspect that we just also discussed in the last session was that the main essence at the moment is that there needs to be some mutual understanding and mutual collaboration between the tool makers, let's say, and also the people who are researching how these tools should work and what's the pedagogy behind it and things like that. So it's very fruitful to bring those people together and to see that it's not just those doing this and the others doing that, but really to try to interact and see that it fits together. And then also Tommaso raised a very important point. So in the area of policy, of course, sometimes it can be a bit like slow. It can be a bit tricky and maybe reduce the speed of adoption of new technologies or something like this. But at the same time, it's very important. Policy is really important to have a framework for the measures that are being developed, because they also need to be secure, for instance, regarding privacy, but they also need to be endurable, let's say, so a little bit sustainable. And for that, you also need the policy guidelines and the background for that. I hope I summarize it well, Tommaso, like this. And I think these were the main points.
Okay, thank you, Verena. And who was coordinating the room 2? Was it Georgios? Or,
yes.
So please go ahead.
Okay, so in our group, an interesting topic emerged across all the themes, which was to think more about pedagogy in two ways, and making use probably of new models of interaction, which you could call as a kind of storytelling approach. So, it turned out that we had, when we talked about it initially, two models in mind, which one was probably more teacher-oriented. He could translate, of course, educational problem into kind of hero's journey, where you have to solve puzzles, to make your adventure, and the learner is the hero who solves these problems and achieves results and achieves, let's say, the bonus at the end. So that is the traditional way of considering the learning problem. But if you turn the narrative approach in the other way around and put the learner into focus, the learner as well can make his story of learning, his story of his achievement, putting himself as a protagonist, and learning develops around him. That could be, and for achieving this, he requires also in the education context new tools that you could again take from storytelling in terms of tools that exist that put focus on the narrative that the individual wants to create about his approach, which also brings in diversity, which brings in, giving the individual a voice to express his way. And on the other way, it requires now assessment. That would be the research component. It would require new ways of assessing this type of individual story, learner story, more appropriately. So that is what we found out in order also to overcome what we have identified, need for agility, yeah, in terms of being more able to adapt, because what has been encountered by all of us, in many cases, our pupils are far ahead in the terms of applying different tools and applying even a kind of multimodality, handling 2 tools, 3 tools at the same time, especially when it comes to interaction, to simultaneous interaction. So talking on the one, chatting, talking, and then solving some type of problem simultaneously. Our pupils are much ahead in their skills than teachers are, and it is, I think, necessity to make more advantage about the skills that the digital generation already has. So that was a little bit the focus, and we try to put them also on the note. I hope I can identify them afterwards again. So it was quite productive.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Georg, I want to ask you one short thing. When you say about this learner-centric storytelling, is it more like serious games? So like it's a social context, or it's really an individual tool where I have my kind of journey learning diary, but I mean, next generation, I mean, futuristic diary?
Well, I mean, I could then pass probably to the expert that we had in the group on exactly teaching teachers the way of which tools and which methods exist to provide these type of approaches. So we had them in the group, and probably it could be a nice step for a little bit looking more deeper into this topic, because this was also
if we can follow up also offline, that would be great, because it seems a very promising angle. Okay, thank you. Then we go to group 3, and this is Wolfgang, right? I can't hear you at the moment, Wolfgang. Maybe you're muted.
Muted.
Yes, now it's good. Yeah, now I hear you.
Right. Well, where's my mural window? Probably it's gone. No, anyhow, we discussed also all the different questions, and I think there we go. We started with number C, and here it was also that we were discussing a lot about the different policy guidelines that sometimes hinder just the quick adoption to the introduction of new tools. And also in particular, when we look about the commercial development, sometimes the commercial companies are not sure how much money they should invest into a certain thing, given the case that probably the politicians react differently when the pandemic is over or other things. So that was something we discussed here. And we also, when we go to number B, theme B, the stakeholders, I come back to the points that the 2 other presenters made. It's this kind of, and we discussed it at the very end, making lectures more social, yeah, and lecture notes more social. Because when you look at Stack Overflow, when you look at all the other tools that you find on the web, they just live because they have the critical mass. They have a lot of information to apply AI and recommender systems. And that is not possible if you just have something within your own university or within your own group, because you don't get enough data, you don't get enough events on the material to apply AI. And on the other hand, we just don't allow that at the moment to build a story around the lecture slides about something like that, as Giorgio told us. So here would be the idea to make all that more social, to allow people to comment better and restructure probably learning material provided by the different lectures. Yeah, and then with best practices, we get a lot of input from the VHS. Really on the aspect that it's not just teacher or learner, that it also has an effect really on the change and transformation of the overall organizations. And there is more than just teachers and learners. There's also the whole administration, the background, and all the things that we should take into consideration. And I see there were several badges on what are the stakeholders looking for best practices. And I think there were five different badges on best practices, and it seems there is not yet a Google search engine for best practices, or there is not yet really a best practice dictionary or Wikipedia. And on the other hand, it's not just enough if I read about best practices. These best practices should also be somehow implemented then in templates that I can adopt and use. Yeah, and Christian Scheibenzuber, he said, well, it's not just enough to tell you how you make good media. If you get good media templates, then it's easier for you to fill them with your content, and that's important.
Very good. Thank you, Wolfgang, and thank you, Georgios and Verena as well. So all that's left for me now is to, I think, wrap up and close this workshop. Let me first say that I am very impressed with the general discussion and the various participation that we had now, especially in this last part. As I said, being a mural administrator, even if I was not in any room, I was seeing things moving and the various sticky notes appearing. And I was actually curious exactly about this making lecture notes more social. And I thought, okay, what does it mean? It's very good that Wolfgang explained it, and it is certainly very promising. I think probably for you all that participated, if you left your contact with us at the registration, we can contact you, or you can follow us with the social media and website that we have. Maybe Marita, you can post again on the global chat the relevant links that I saw we did at the beginning, but I don't know, when people come back from a breakout, maybe they don't have it. And of course, DEL4ALL goes on, and at the moment seems that this formula of this workshop is very valuable to combine some more expert panel discussion with more interactive parts, and the tool sets are adopted because we also have the problem of everyone, right? We have to combine what we want to do with the tools that we use, with the technology that actually doesn't get in the way. And we know there is much more that we could do with this online collaboration tools, and also finger crossed on hybrid or in-person events that also, of course, they have complementary advantages. So I don't know if there is some further question or intervention from people in the groups. Otherwise, I just thank everyone. We were booked until 4, but kindly the organizer let the Zoom session running, so we don't have, strictly speaking, a hurry, but I think we did a very good use of the time. And so I thank you once again, and please check on our channel to be updated, because all this knowledge, these let's say stimulating topics that we heard today, they are actually absorbed by us, and we will not only put them in the project output, the core documents that we are working on, but also we will use them to learn and to push forward this discussion in the next events that we will participate in and organize beyond our usual communication channels. So once again, thank you very much for your time, your insight, and your participation in this workshop. Thanks to our speakers and to everyone that participated, and thanks also to the team of colleagues that is running the whole Zoom and various tools behind the scenes. And last but not least, also thank you to the Ec-Tel organizer for hosting us and for giving us the technological and also human support to make this workshop a success within the bigger success of Ec-Tel. Thanks again to everyone. Have a good day and enjoy the rest of the Ec-Tel conference.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.